It is a beautiful and simple story that we are given on this fifth Sunday of Lent. What are we to do with it? What are we to make of it? At this time, 1 week before Palm Sunday and 2 weeks before Good Friday and Easter. It's a story about a very small place and a very small event. A little home in Bethany. Bethany is kind of a suburb of Jerusalem, the last village that you come to when you're coming up from the valley down by Jericho and you're on your way to the holy city. The last village will be this little town of Bethany. After this, you go down into the Kidron Valley and up the other side to the city itself. And in this little house, in this little village, live Mary and Martha and Lazarus. Unique in the telling of the gospel as a kind of family unit. And they were quite clearly somehow related to Jesus as at least friends. Somewhere they had run into him before. If Luke is right in the telling of his story, this would not be the first meal that Jesus had had in their home. If John is right, that Jesus went to Jerusalem several times to celebrate the Passover, then maybe he has stayed here before on those journeys. One way or the other, they clearly know him from the past. And we know that most particularly because of the story that's told in the chapter just before this. And that's the story of what happens when Lazarus dies. You remember that Jesus is some distance away, and Mary and Martha send him a message and say, "Master, the one whom you love is sick." The one who you love is an unusual term to use. It's not the way you would refer to Lazarus, probably, if he were just a disciple. He obviously had a special place in Jesus' life. He was the one that Jesus loved. Maybe it is that they were friends from a long time ago. Clearly, they are friends now. And maybe through that friendship, Mary and Martha have come to be friends with Jesus as well over some period of time. So there's a sense to this story that it's taking place among friends, relatively young folks, having a meal together in a home. And again, the important thing about understanding this story is the story that came before it. Because you remember, after they've sent for Jesus, they kind of cried out, hoping that he would come and heal their brother Lazarus. He doesn't go. And he waits for 2 days. And finally, after 2 days, he says to his disciples, "Okay, let's go." And along the way, he says to them, Lazarus has died. So he knows what his delay meant. He seems almost to have done it intentionally. And to know not just that Lazarus is dead, but the grief that has brought to his friends Mary and Martha. And he goes towards Bethany, and Martha hears that he's coming, and she goes out to meet him somewhere on the road, and she says to him, Jesus, if you had been here, he wouldn't have died. How does she say that exactly? Is it an accusation, or is it a statement of faith? Because she goes on to say, but even now I know that whatever you ask of God, God will give you. And Jesus says to her, well, you know, Lazarus will live again. And she says, oh yeah, I know. On the resurrection, on the last day, he'll come alive. And Jesus says, I am the resurrection and the life. And Martha goes back to the home and gets Mary and says, Mary, he tells her what he has said to her and says, Mary, he's calling for you now. And Mary goes out from the house, and she is weeping and in tears. And she puts herself at Jesus' feet, and she says to him, if you had been here, he would not have died. The same thing her sister has said. The kind of accusation and statement of faith. And her tears draw him to cry. And for the only time in the Gospels, we see him crying alongside someone else, maybe with an arm wrapped around her, sharing in her grief. And then the three of them go to the cave where Lazarus' body has been put, to that grave, and there's a stone rolled in front. And he says, roll the stone away. And Martha says, well, it's really going to smell bad. And he says, just roll it away. And they roll the stone away, and out steps Lazarus, still wrapped in his burial cloths. And Jesus says, unwrap him and set him free. It is this event, John tells us,